They thought they had seen every side of you. The loud one, the patient one, the angry one, the forgiving one. They built their strategies around those versions, convinced they had mapped the entirety of your range. What they never imagined was silence mixed with precision. The scariest move you pulled off wasn't an explosion of rage, but a measured retreat into clarity. You stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped feeding their ego with your reactions. That absence of noise was louder than any shout could ever be. They suddenly realized they could no longer predict you, and unpredictability is what terrifies people the most. The scariest move is not the one that breaks a window. It's the one that removes the floor beneath them without warning. They underestimated the power of timing. You didn't fight every battle. You let them believe they were winning, let them grow comfortable in their illusion of dominance. Every time they thought they had you cornered, you played patient, studying the angles. And when the moment came, you made one move that flipped everything. The scariest move is never frantic, it's deliberate. When you finally acted, it wasn't with half measures or desperation. It was decisive, final, and impossible to reverse. That is why it shook them. It reminded them that the person who controls the tempo controls the outcome, and you owned the tempo without them ever noticing. In relationships, the scariest move is detachment. They expected arguments, expected tears, expected spirals. What they didn't expect was indifference. You shifted from proving yourself to protecting yourself, and that transformation made them powerless. They could no longer bait you into their emotional games. Their insults became air, their praise became irrelevant, their drama became background noise. When someone cannot pull you into their chaos anymore, they lose their grip completely. That realization crushed them because it wasn't just that you stopped engaging. It was that you didn't even need them to notice your withdrawal. You left, mentally and emotionally, before they even realized you were gone. The scariest move often feels simple from the inside. It is a choice to conserve energy rather than waste it. They expected you to exhaust yourself explaining, defending, proving. You didn't. You used that energy to build, to grow, to heal. And then when they looked up, expecting you still to be circling them, they found you far ahead. That is the kind of move that terrifies people. Growth done in silence leaves no room for their interference. By the time they notice, you are untouchable. They cannot pull you back because you are already living in a different reality than the one they tried to trap you in. Psychology explains why this unsettles them. Humans crave predictability. It gives them comfort and confidence. They study you expecting patterns, and when those patterns break, their entire framework collapses. Your scariest move wasn't aggression but unpredictability. You took what they thought they knew and flipped it inside out. When someone realizes their map no longer applies, they are left directionless. That is when fear creeps in, because they know if they cannot predict your moves, they cannot protect themselves from the consequences of them. They were prepared for resistance, but they weren't prepared for self-control. That's what made your move terrifying. You didn't fight recklessly. You chose stillness, chose patience, chose long-term advantage over temporary release. Control is a weapon more dangerous than anger because it cannot be manipulated. They pushed every button, expecting sparks, but your calm became a wall they couldn't climb. That wall reminded them they had no power anymore. Power only exists if you hand it to them, and you stopped offering it. The scariest move was showing them that the strings they thought were attached to you had already been cut. You dismantled them without raising your voice. You dismantled them without breaking into chaos. The move that scared them was subtle but permanent. You stopped valuing their approval. Approval was their currency, and once you stopped needing it, they went bankrupt. They thrived on making you prove, but you no longer played the proving game. Instead, you invested in your own worth. That shift destroyed their illusion of superiority. They tried to recover by mocking you, questioning you, testing you again, but nothing landed. They were shadowboxing with a ghost who had already walked out of the ring. In friendships, the scariest move is disappearing without drama. You didn't announce your departure. You didn't justify your absence. You simply left. Toxic people expect closure, not because they want peace, but because closure gives them another chance to manipulate. By denying them that, you cut off the supply completely. Silence becomes your blade, sharper than any argument. They tell others stories about why you left, but none of them match the truth. And the truth is the scariest part. You didn't leave because of them. You left because you finally saw yourself clearly, and once that happened, they had no place in your future. The scariest move also lies in reinvention. They thought they had you defined, boxed, labeled. They underestimated how much a person can transform once they stop asking for permission. You changed your habits, your standards, your path. They were still fighting the old version of you, while you were already 3 steps ahead, operating in silence. Reinvention unsettles people, because it forces them to accept they no longer know you. And when they no longer know you, they can no longer control you. That is why they whisper your name with caution now. You became a stranger to them, and strangers are unpredictable. Every toxic game ends when someone refuses to keep playing. They can only spin you in circles if you give them the permission of reaction. They depend on your energy to keep their drama alive. Without your responses, their clever insults are meaningless. Their manipulative silences collapse. Their twisted rules lose weight. You became untouchable the moment you stopped stepping into the arena they built for you. They expected resistance, shouting, an endless back and forths, because those outcomes still kept you chained. What they never prepared for was your indifference. The refusal to play is more devastating than any comeback because it starves them of the validation they so desperately crave. Refusing to play isn't about walking away with bitterness. It's about walking away with clarity. You stop mistaking their chaos for passion, their insults for honesty, their inconsistency for mystery. You see the game for what it is, a cycle designed to keep you small. Breaking the cycle does not require destroying them. It requires choosing not to respond. Silence becomes your rebellion. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It simply denies them what they need. And once you deny them, they wither. They can't function without fuel, and you stopped giving them even a spark. In relationships, this is the only way true freedom is earned. A toxic partner thrives on knowing which buttons to push. They don't need to win outright. They just need to prove they can still influence your mood. As long as you are reactive, they are relevant. But when you stop reacting, they lose their anchor. They will escalate. They will perform. They will act as if your refusal to engage makes you cold. Yet beneath that accusation lies panic. They panic because their strongest weapon, your emotion, is gone. The game ends not with shouting, but with a steady refusal to participate. That is how you reclaim your peace. Toxic friends play by similar rules. They gossip, compare, or plant doubts in your mind because the cycle of proving keeps you tethered to them. They push you to explain, defend, or justify yourself until you are drained. But when you refuse to explain, when you decide their approval has no weight in your life, the strings snap. They cannot manipulate a mind that no longer seeks their validation. That is when you learn the cruelty of indifference. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to warn the world. You just have to refuse to keep playing their endless games. And that refusal speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. In work environments, toxic games can become prisons. Colleagues bait you with competition, bosses dangle false promises, rivals provoke you with politics. They expect you to waste your time reacting, proving, battling for scraps. But the real victory comes when you step back and focus on results instead of performance. Every hour spent playing their game is an hour stolen from your future. When you stop engaging in petty battles and put your energy into building undeniable value, you exit their system entirely. They lose the ability to touch you because you've built something larger than their distractions. That's how careers shift from fragile to untouchable. Psychology explains the grip of these games. They thrive on intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes you react with anger, sometimes with tears, sometimes with explanation, and that inconsistency feeds their sense of power. It mirrors the same mechanism that keeps people addicted to slot machines. They don't need constant wins. They just need the hope of one. By refusing to play, You strip away their addiction. You deny them the chance of ever winning again. And the moment you break that cycle, the illusion of their power collapses. They are not magicians. They are simply gamblers with tricks, and gamblers always lose when the table is removed. Refusing to play requires strength, because it feels unnatural at first. You've been conditioned to respond, to defend, to prove. The silence feels heavy, the lack of reaction feels wrong. But that discomfort is where transformation begins. You discover that their words don't shape your reality. You learn that peace is not something you beg for. It's something you create by protecting your focus. With every ignored provocation, your foundation grows stronger. And the stronger you become, the weaker they appear. Soon you realize they were never as powerful as they seemed. They only looked big because you were standing too close. The moment you refuse to keep playing, their desperation exposes itself. They will try harder, bait you louder, twist themselves into performances of rage or sorrow. But you see through it. You see the child beneath the mask, screaming for attention because control is slipping away. The performance that once felt intimidating now looks pathetic. That shift in perception is the true ending of the game. They lose their hold over you not because they stopped playing, but because you did. They are still moving pieces on a board you no longer recognize. That is why they look confused, lost, even panicked. Their game continues, but it continues without you, and that absence is unbearable for them. Every toxic game ends when you value your peace more than their approval. When you realize your energy is too expensive to be wasted on proving anything. When you decide that silence is not weakness but power. They thrive on your attention, and you deny it. They thrive on your reaction, and you withhold it. They thrive on your confusion, and you clarify your own truth. With each refusal, you dismantle the structure they built. It doesn't collapse in fire, it collapses in neglect. And neglect is the sharpest cruelty of all, because it leaves them irrelevant. Silence is a weapon, and its strike is felt only after the damage is irreversible. They underestimated how powerful stillness could be, because they thought strength was noise, confrontation, and sharp words. They expected you to fight back openly, to give them the satisfaction of a war they could measure. Instead, you left them with nothing. No reaction, no argument, no explanation. At first, they laughed at your quiet. They mistook it for weakness. But silence is patient. It doesn't reveal its effect immediately. It seeps into their mind, making them question their importance, their influence, their relevance. Long after the moment passes, they begin to feel the wound. And when they finally realize how deep it cuts, there is no undoing it. That's why silence frightens them more than any weapon ever could. Your refusal to engage is not passive. It is calculated. You chose silence when they demanded your reaction, because you understood psychology better than they did. Words give them something to twist. Explanations give them something to attack. Defenses give them something to undermine. Silence gives them nothing. It leaves them stranded with their own thoughts, their own insecurities, their own unhealed wounds. People who thrive on control cannot tolerate silence, because silence forces them to face themselves. They will replay the moment endlessly, searching for meaning, searching for evidence of victory or defeat. In the end, all they find is emptiness, and that emptiness eats them alive. In relationships, silence is the moment you decide your peace is worth more than their performance. They provoke you to argue, to beg, to spiral, because any of those reactions prove they still matter. But when you stay silent, they feel the absence like a blade. No matter how loud they get, no matter how desperate they act, your quiet becomes unbearable. They accuse you of being cold, detached, heartless. Yet what they are really saying is that your silence is reminding them of a truth they can't escape. They are no longer in control. Once you've chosen silence, the relationship has already shifted. The damage is done, and the balance of power will never tilt back in their favor. The cruelty of silence is that it doesn't just end conversations, it rewrites them. Every word they said echoes louder in their mind because you didn't respond. Every insult they threw hangs heavy because you didn't validate it with anger. Every manipulative phrase they tried lingers unanswered, which makes them wonder if you saw through it. Silence magnifies their words until they hear their own ugliness clearly. They wanted you to fight, to distract them from themselves. Instead, you handed them the mirror of silence, and now they choke on their own reflection. The weapon is not the absence of sound. It is the way silence forces their lies to echo back at them without interruption. In careers, silence is strategy. When rivals try to bait you with politics, you don't respond in the moment. You let their noise hang in the air, revealing how insecure and desperate they are. Later, when results speak louder than gossip, your silence becomes proof of strength. They realize too late that their words did not weaken you. They weakened themselves by exposing how much energy they wasted. Silence in professional spaces communicates confidence. It says you don't need to fight for every scrap of recognition because you are building results that cannot be debated. By the time they understand this, their credibility has already crumbled. The damage is irreversible, and you never raised your voice once. Psychology proves silence is not neutral, it is disruptive. Humans are wired to crave closure, to resolve tension, to make sense of unfinished business. When you give no response, you deny them that closure. That denial creates obsession. They begin replaying conversations in their head, analyzing your expressions, wondering what you are thinking. Your silence becomes louder than any reply. It invades their thoughts long after the moment ends. And the longer the silence stretches, the heavier it becomes. Eventually, they break under the weight of it. By then, the damage is already permanent. Silence has done what noise never could. It has lived in their mind rent-free until they destroy themselves. In love, silence marks the shift from entanglement to liberation. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who twists your words, you stop being their prisoner. They will try everything: mockery, guilt, sweet words, even rage, to make you break your silence. But every failed attempt reminds them that the chains have snapped. They cannot argue with quiet. They cannot manipulate what is not spoken. Your silence becomes your escape, and by the time they realize they can't drag you back, you are already gone. That is why silence is terrifying. It signals endings without announcement. It delivers consequences without warning. It finalizes what they thought they still controlled. Your silence is not just absence, it is presence. It commands attention precisely because it leaves no easy answers. They fill in the blanks with their own fears, their own doubts, their own failures. And the mind always assumes the worst. That's why silence lingers longer than any insult. An insult fades once it's countered. Silence grows until it devours their confidence. They start to wonder if you ever cared, if you ever will again, if they ever had you at all. That uncertainty gnaws at them until the damage becomes unbearable. Silence doesn't fight them. It lets them fight themselves. The effectiveness of silence lies in timing. It is not about avoiding every conversation. It is about choosing moments where your absence carries weight. You don't give them the chance to twist your words when clarity has already been made. You don't validate lies by engaging with them. You don't waste your energy on proving yourself when the truth will eventually reveal itself. By withholding your voice strategically, you conserve power while forcing them to waste theirs. When the damage finally reveals itself, it is too late for them to undo it. That's when they understand the cruelty of silence. It moves slowly, but once it strikes, it leaves scars that no apology can heal. Power shatters when the pawn refuses to play the role it was assigned. They built their schemes around the assumption that you would obey, that you would bend under pressure, that you would perform the same responses over and over until your usefulness ran dry. They never imagined what would happen if you stopped moving the way they expected. By breaking the script, you broke the system. The illusion of their power was never about superiority. It was about your compliance. When you decided you would no longer play small, the entire game board fractured. They could no longer predict outcomes, and unpredictability is the death of control. They relied on your predictability. Every insult thrown at you was designed to make you defend yourself. Every manipulation planted was designed to make you react emotionally. Every backhanded compliment was meant to keep you hungry for approval. But when you stopped feeding their hunger, they starved. Their power wasn't inherent, It was borrowed from your reactions. The moment you refused to perform the role of pawn, their leverage turned to dust. They can't intimidate someone who isn't seeking validation. They can't shame someone who stopped needing their acceptance. The system only worked because you played along. You ended the game when you chose silence over reaction and clarity over chaos. In relationships, this realization becomes brutal. Toxic partner counts on your fear of abandonment. They count on guilt, on the idea that you will always fold to their moods. When you stop playing that role, they unravel. They scream louder, sulk harder, manipulate deeper. But none of it works anymore. You refuse to be the pawn they can control. That refusal forces them to face a truth they cannot tolerate. They never had power over you. They only had tricks. Once exposed, those tricks lose all their weight. And when tricks collapse, so does the image of dominance they wrap themselves in. Among friends, refusing to play the pawn changes everything. Some people stay close because they depend on you playing the role of listener, comforter, or backup to their endless chaos. They drain you with problems but vanish when you need support. They believe you will keep showing up because pawns don't walk off the board. But the day you stop answering calls, stop carrying burdens that aren't yours, stop solving problems they create, the dynamic flips. They accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of being cold. What they really mean is that you no longer serve as their pawn. And without pawns, their entire structure collapses. At work, pawns are the ones expected to accept every demand, to take every task, to never question authority. Leaders who thrive on exploitation count on obedience. But once you understand your worth and refuse to be moved like a piece in someone else's strategy, the game shifts. You either command respect where you stand, or you outgrow the board entirely. They call you rebellious, difficult, even arrogant, but the truth is simple. You stopped being their pawn. And without pawns, leaders lose their illusion of power. Real authority requires respect, not blind compliance. When you withdraw compliance, their fake authority shatters. Psychology makes this even clearer. Systems of control are built on roles. Every manipulator assigns parts: victim, savior, villain, fool. They place you where it benefits them most. By accepting the role, you feed their illusion of control. But when you step out of the role, when you refuse to argue, refuse to beg, refuse to explain, the system malfunctions. They don't know how to continue the play without you acting your part. That breakdown terrifies them because it proves their power was never real. Their strength existed only as long as you agreed to remain in character. The cruelty in refusing to be a pawn is that it doesn't require confrontation. You don't need to shout. You don't need to prove. You don't even need to expose them. You simply stop playing. You deny them the reaction, the presence, the attention that sustains their power. And slowly, they crumble under the weight of their own performance. They are left screaming lines to an empty audience, and the silence becomes unbearable. They wanted you in chains, but chains only work if you don't walk away. You walked away, and the chains dissolved. That is the quiet cruelty of liberation. In love, this act is even sharper. When you stop being the pawn, you no longer accept breadcrumbs as affection. You no longer allow cycles of chaos disguised as passion. You no longer let guilt dictate your choices. By stepping off the board, you prove to yourself that you are not dependent on their approval for survival. That shift is terrifying for them because it exposes the truth. They depended on you more than you ever depended on them. You were the one carrying the game, and when you stopped, their illusion collapsed. That collapse leaves scars, because they know they will never find another pawn who played as well as you once did. Your refusal creates freedom, and freedom is contagious. Others watching from the sidelines see your defiance and begin to question their own roles. Pawns who thought they had no choice realize they do. And when one pawn refuses, others follow. That is how entire toxic systems collapse, not with loud rebellion, but with quiet refusals that pile into revolutions. By stepping out of your assigned role, you don't just free yourself, you inspire others to do the same. And nothing terrifies manipulators more than the idea of pawns learning they can walk away